Admiral Koros Valandrix had ruled the hegemony of ascended worlds for 3 centuries, watching lesser species crawl before his throne on distant Nexus Prime. Today, however, something unprecedented had occurred. A species had declined his generous offer. VASSALAGE. The holographic display flickered, showing a small blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, Earth, the third world from Sol, inhabited by a species calling themselves humans. Valandrix's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the intelligence reports. Bipedal, carbon-based, short-lived, utterly primitive by galactic standards, my lord. High Counselor Thyraz Mordain approached the obsidian throne, his scaled high glistening under the artificial suns of the throne chamber. The humans have transmitted their response. Valandrix gestured with one of his 6 arms, and the message materialized in the air between them. The human representative, a female with graying hair and steel in her eyes, appeared as a 3-dimensional projection. Admiral Valandrix of the hegemony, the human began, her voice steady despite addressing the most powerful being in known space. I am Secretary General Naya Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Council. We have reviewed your generous offer of protection. Our answer is no. A ripple of shocked silence swept through the throne chamber. In 3,000 years of expansion, no species had ever refused the hegemony's protection. Valandrix's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Furthermore, the human continued, we formally request that you remove your monitoring stations from our system. Within 72 Earth hours, any hegemony vessels remaining after that deadline will be considered hostile. The projection winked out. For a moment, the vast chamber large enough to house a small city remained silent. Then Valandrix began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his thorax, building to a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. Soon, the entire court joined in, a cacophony of alien amusement echoing off the walls. Hostile. Valandrix wheezed between laughs. These humans consider us hostile. High Counselor Mordain consulted his data pad. My lord, shall I deploy the 4th Fleet to remind them of their place? Perhaps glassing one of their major population centers will encourage compliance. No. Valandrix waved a dismissive hand. That would be wasteful. Send a single dreadnought. Make it the Worldbreaker. Captain Zenkareth can handle this personally. I want him to record the humans' capitulation for the archives. Future species need to understand the futility of defying us. What Valandrix didn't know, what none of them knew, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since first contact 2 years ago. Hidden in asteroid fields, buried in the depths of gas giants, scattered across the void between worlds, humanity's true defense grid waited on Earth. Secretary General Okonkwo stood in the war room beneath Geneva, surrounded by screens showing real-time positions of every human asset in the solar system. The room thrummed with barely contained energy. Technicians and strategists working with the focused intensity of a species backed into a corner. Ma'am, called out Fleet Admiral Darius Kane, his weathered face grim. Long-range sensors confirm it. Single hegemony dreadnought, Worldbreaker class, inbound to Earth. ETA, 36 hours, just one ship, asked General Yuki Tanaka, head of the Terran Marine Corps. That's either supreme confidence or supreme arrogance. Both. Okonkwo replied. They've never faced a species willing to fight extinction wars. She turned to the massive tactical display dominating the room's center. Admiral Kane, are our people in position? Every asset, ma'am. Project Damocles is hot and ready. The question is whether our intel on hegemony shielding technology is accurate. Okonkwo nodded grimly. 2 years of covert reconnaissance, stolen technology, and careful observation had led to this moment. The hegemony's power wasn't just in their weapons, it was in their absolute certainty that no one would dare challenge them. They're about to learn, she said quietly, that humans have never been particularly good at knowing when we're beaten. The Worldbreaker dropped out of hyperspace, at the edge of Earth's solar system like a metallic cancer against the stars. Captain Zenkareth stood on the bridge of the massive vessel, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the light from dozens of tactical displays. At 2 kilometers long and armed with planet-cracking weaponry, the dreadnought represented the pinnacle of hegemony military engineering. Sir, reported his tactical officer, multiple human vessels are moving to intercept. Primitive fusion drives, chemical propulsion. Wait, the officer's voice took on a puzzled tone. Sir, I'm reading some unusual energy signatures. Kareth's multifaceted eyes swiveled to examine the sensor data. 17 human ships were approaching in a loose formation, nothing larger than a heavy cruiser by hegemony standards, laughably small. Weapon status? He inquired. All systems optimal. Captain, primary siege cannon charged and ready. Point. Defense grids active. On Earth. Fleet Admiral Kane watched the tactical situation unfold from the bridge of the UEDS Indomitable, humanity's flagship. Round him, the 17 ships of Battle Group Alpha held formation, their hulls bristling with humanity's most advanced weaponry. Range to target, 2 million kilometers and closing. Reported Commander Leela Vasquez from the weapons station. Damocles platforms are tracking. What's their disposition? Kane asked. Single ship, holding steady course for Earth. No escort. Vessels detected. Vasquez paused. Sir, they're not even bothering to maneuver defensively. Kane smiled grimly. Arrogance. Humanity's greatest weapon had always been that their enemies underestimated them. All ships. This is Admiral Kane. Execute Plan Thermopylae. Show them what humans do when backed into a corner. The World Breaker continued his stately approach until Kareth grew bored with the display. Opened a channel to the human fleet. His image materialized on the bridge of every human vessel, a towering figure of living crystal and metal, eyes like burning stars, primitive beings. His voice resonated through the quantum communicators. I am Captain Zen Kareth of His Imperial Majesty's ship World Breaker. You will surrender immediately and prepare to receive occupation forces. Any resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your homeworld. The response came from Admiral Kane himself, to Kareth's surprise. The human was smiling. Captain Kareth, this is Admiral Darius Kane of the United Earth Defense Fleet. I have a counter-proposal. Turn around and leave our system immediately, or we will demonstrate why humans have survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and the world wars. Kareth's laugh sounded like breaking glass. Admiral, your entire fleet mass is less than one of my secondary weapon arrays. What could you possibly do to threaten the World Breaker? Let me show you, Kane replied calmly. All ships, execute Damocles Strike Package Alpha. What happened? Next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The 17 human ships didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, they launched what appeared to be simple metal rods, tungsten penetrators, each weighing 10 tons and accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by humanity's most closely guarded secret, functional mass drivers that bent space-time itself. The World Breaker's shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and explosive ordnance. They were not designed to handle kinetic projectiles traveling at relativistic speeds. The first rod struck the Dreadnought's forward shields and passed through them. Like they weren't there, the second hit the hull itself, punching completely through to kilometers of hardened alien metal and emerging from the other side in a spray of superheated plasma. On the World Breaker's bridge, alarm screamed. Kareth stared in disbelief as 17 more impacts registered across his ship's hull. Damage report. He roared. Massive hull breaches on decks 7 through 15. We've lost primary power to sections 4 and 9. Casualty reports coming in from. The tactical officer never finished his sentence. The 17th tungsten rod struck the bridge section directly, turning the command center into a cloud of metallic vapor dot in the depths of space. The World Breaker began to list. Atmosphere venting from dozens of wounds. Emergency lights flickered across its hull as damage control teams scrambled to contain the devastation. Admiral Kane watched the enemy dreadnought's death throes with grim satisfaction. Signal all ships. Prepare for boarding action. I want every piece of technology on that ship cataloged and copied before we finish her off. Sir. Commander Vasquez called out. We're receiving a transmission from the enemy vessel. They're requesting terms for surrender. Kane's smile was sharp as a blade. Denied. They came here to exterminate us. Now they get to see what extinction actually looks like. The wreckage of the World Breaker tumbled through the void. Its hull split open like a cracked egg, venting atmosphere and debris in glittering streams. Captain Zen Kareth's replacement, Commander Vex Moradin, huddled in the emergency command center deep within the ship's core, his crystalline exoskeleton cracked and leaking vital fluids. Give me a quantum burst transmission to Nexus Prime, he ordered through chattering mandibles. Priority Alpha, the humans, they're not what we thought. Light years away, Admiral Valandrix received the transmission in his private chambers. The message was brief, desperate, and impossible to believe. The World Breaker crippled. Captain Kareth dead. Human technology far beyond initial estimates. Impossible. Valandrix growled, his four eyes focusing on the holographic recording of the battle. He watched in growing horror as primitive human ships destroyed his most powerful vessel with weapons that shouldn't exist. How did they acquire such technology? High Counselor Morday materialized beside him, his own expression grim. My lord, our xenoarchaeology teams believe the humans may have discovered and reverse-engineered artifacts from the predecessor ruins on their outer worlds. The energy signatures match theoretical models for predecessor mass manipulation technology. The predecessors, the ancient species that once ruled the galaxy before vanishing into myth. Their ruins were scattered across thousands of worlds. Their technology largely incomprehensible even to the hegemony's greatest minds. No, Valandrix said slowly. No species that young could possibly understand predecessor technology. Our own. Scientists have studied it for millennia without success. Perhaps, Mordain replied carefully. That is precisely why they succeeded where we failed. They approached it without preconceptions, on Earth. The war room beneath Geneva buzzed with controlled chaos. Secretary General Okonkwo stood before the main tactical display, watching as hegemony reinforcements began massing at the edge of human-monitored space. Long-range reconnaissance drones reported the movement of entire battle fleets. How many ships? She asked Admiral Kane, who had returned from the first engagement with captured hegemony technology and prisoners. Current count is over 300 vessels of various classes. They're staging at the Proxima Centauri system. Kane's expression was stone. Ma'am, our analysis of the captured data suggests they're preparing for what they call a purification fleet, complete extermination of our species. General Tanaka leaned forward. How long do we have? 2 weeks, maybe 3. They're being cautious now, bringing overwhelming force. Kane paused. There's something else. The prisoners, they're terrified of us. Apparently, no one has ever destroyed a hegemony dreadnought before. We've shattered 3,000 years of military doctrine in a single engagement. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Xenotechnology Division, spoke up from her position near the alien artifacts they'd recovered. The hegemony technology is impressive, but it's built on principles of overwhelming superiority. They never developed tactics for fighting equals, let alone species that might outmatch them in specific areas. Okonkwo studied the strategic map. Red markers showed hegemony positions, hundreds of them, spreading like an infection across local space. Blue markers showed human assets, pitifully few by comparison. Options, she asked. We could surrender, suggested the Minister of Diplomatic Affairs. Perhaps negotiate terms. No. The word came from General Tanaka with absolute finality. I've read the hegemony files. They don't do terms. They do extermination or enslavement. Nothing else. Admiral Kane nodded agreement. Our analysis confirms it. Every species that's encountered them either serves or dies. There are no exceptions in their 3,000-year history. Then we give them something new to remember, Okonkwo said quietly. What's the status on Project Ragnarok? Dr. Vasquez looked up from her alien artifacts. The prototypes are ready, but we've only managed to complete 5 units. The predecessor technology requires exotic materials we can barely synthesize. 5 units, Okonkwo repeated, against 300 ships. Ma'am, Admiral Kane interjected, there's something you should know about our prisoners. They keep asking the same question. What kind of species builds weapons like this? They can't comprehend why we would create something so destructive. And what do you tell them? Kane's smile was cold as winter steel. I tell them we're the species that survived when our own planet tried to kill us. For 200,000 years. We're the species that looked at every disaster, every extinction event, every seemingly impossible challenge, and said not today. We're humans, and we don't know how to quit. The tactical display updated, showing new hegemony movements. The enemy was marshaling forces from across their local territory, dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, planetary siege platforms, enough firepower to crack worlds. They're planning to hit us with everything, General Tanaka observed. Classic overwhelming. Force doctrine. Good, Okonkwo said, surprising everyone in the room. Let them come with their entire fleet. Let them bring every ship they can muster. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. Because when we're done with them, the galaxy is going to learn what happens when you threaten humanity's survival. She turned to address the room. Gentlemen, ladies, we're about to fight the most important battle in human history, not just for our survival, but for our right to exist as a free species. The enemy expects us to fold. They expect us to beg. They expect us to die quietly. Her voice rose, carrying through the comm systems to every human military installation across the solar system. Instead, we're going to show them what our ancestors meant when they said, "Give me liberty or give me death." We're going to make them rue the day they laughed at Earth. The Hegemony Purification Fleet materialized at the edge of the Sol system, like a metallic storm cloud. 347 ships of the line, ranging from kilometer-long destroyers to the massive Nexus throne. Admiral Valandrix's personal command ship stretching nearly for kilometers. From bow to stern, the combined firepower could have reduced entire star systems to cosmic dust. Admiral Valandrix stood in his battle throne, surveying the tactical displays with satisfaction. Every major fleet commander in the Hegemony had volunteered for this campaign the chance to personally exterminate the species that had humiliated their forces was too tempting to resist. "Sir, we're detecting 17 human vessels in formation near the asteroid belt," reported Fleet Tactical Coordinator Thyron Valish. "They appear to be the same ships that engaged the Worldbreaker. Only 17. Valandrix's mandibles clicked with amusement. Perhaps they had finally realized the futility of resistance. "Very well. All ships, advance to optimal firing range. I want those primitive vessels vaporized simultaneously. Leave nothing larger than molecules." The massive fleet began its approach, moving in perfect formation like a school of mechanical predators. What they didn't detect were the thousands of small objects drifting apparently dead in space. Throughout the outer system, objects that human engineers had spent 2 years carefully positioning and concealing. On the bridge of the UEDS Indomitable, Admiral Kane watched the enemy advance with the calm of a man who had already accepted his own death. Around him, his bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, knowing they were about to either make history or become it. "Ranged a primary target?" he asked. 50 million kilometers and closing," reported Commander Vasquez. "All Ragnarok units are armed and tracking enemy fleet composition: 3 command dreadnoughts, including their flagship, 47 heavy cruisers, 92 destroyers, and over 100 support vessels. Total estimated crew, 4.7 million beings." Kane nodded grimly. "In less than an hour, either humanity would be extinct or the galaxy would witness the largest naval defeat in recorded history. All ships, this is Admiral Kane. Execute Protocol Omega. For Earth, for humanity, for the right to exist among the stars." The 17 human ships accelerated toward the Hegemony fleet, their fusion drives burning bright against the darkness. It looked like a suicidal charge, which was exactly what Valandrix expected. "Pathetic," he muttered. "They're going to ram us. How gloriously primitive." He raised one of his 6 arms. "All ships, open fire. Eliminate them." The space between the fleets erupted in violence. Hundreds of energy beams lanced out from the Hegemony vessels, each one capable of vaporizing a city. Point defense systems created webs of destruction as the human ships jigged and weaved through the deadly maze. The UEDS Defiant took a direct hit from a Hegemony battle cruiser, her hull cracking open like an egg. The UEDS Courageous followed. Seconds later, her reactor containment failing in a brief starbright explosion. But the remaining human ships pressed on, their own weapons firing streams of relativistic projectiles that punched through Hegemony shields and armor with equal ease. 3 Hegemony destroyers died in as many seconds. Their hulls turned to expanding clouds of plasma. "Sir," called Valish, "the humans are breaking through our forward line. They're heading directly for the Nexus throne." Valandrix smiled. "Let them come. Activate the flagship's primary siege array. I want to personally vaporize their command ship." But as the Nexus throne's massive weapons began to charge, Admiral Kane spoke 3 words into his communicator: "Execute Ragnarok Protocol." Throughout the Sol system, 5 devices that shouldn't have existed activated simultaneously. Each one was built around a core of predecessor technology that humanity had spent 2 years learning to understand, not through scientific study, but through intuitive leaps that only a young species could make. The devices were mass manipulators on a scale never before achieved. Each one created a localized distortion in space-time itself, generating artificial gravity wells of crushing intensity. The first Ragnarok device activated near Jupiter, creating a gravitational anomaly that pulled 3 Hegemony heavy cruisers out of formation and into each other at significant fractions of light speed. The collision released enough energy to briefly outshine the sun. The second device triggered in the asteroid belt, turning the space around 50 enemy vessels into a maelstrom of crushing tidal forces. Ships designed to withstand the vacuum of space were compressed into metallic spheres in seconds. Admiral Valandrix watched in growing horror as his fleet began to disintegrate. What are they doing? What is this technology? His answer came from the human admiral's final transmission, broadcast on all frequencies as the UEDS Indomitable made her final approach to the Nexus. Throne, this is Admiral Darius Kane of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You came to our system expecting an easy victory over primitives. Instead, you found the one species in the galaxy insane enough to weaponize the fundamental forces of reality itself. The third Ragnarok device activated, creating a gravity well that caught the Nexus throne and began pulling her inexorably toward it. Admiral Valandrix felt his mighty flagship groan under impossible stresses as her hull began to buckle. We are humans, Kane's voice continued as his ship opened fire with every weapon she had, and we have spent our entire evolutionary history learning to turn the universe's attempts to kill us into weapons against our enemies. The fourth and fifth Ragnarok devices triggered in sequence, each one claiming dozens more hegemony vessels. In less than 10 minutes, the most powerful fleet ever assembled had been reduced to twisted wreckage and expanding gas clouds. Admiral Valandrix's last transmission, broadcast back to Nexus Prime as his flagship broke apart under gravitational forces that defied comprehension, consisted of 5 words that would echo through hegemony space for generations. The humans, they're all insane. The destruction of the Purification Fleet sent shockwaves through hegemony space that reached far beyond the physical. On Nexus Prime, High Counselor Thyras Mordain stood before the emergency session of the Imperial Council, his scaled hide pale with fear. My lords, he announced to the assembled alien dignitaries, Admiral Valandrix is dead. The Purification Fleet has been completely destroyed. Of 347 vessels, only 12 escape pods were recovered by automated rescue drones. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from a dozen species chittered, roared, and hissed in their native languages. The impossible had happened. Humanity had not merely survived the hegemony's wrath, they had obliterated it. How many casualties? Demanded General Korax Deathbringer, Supreme Commander of Hegemony Ground Forces. 4.7 million confirmed dead, Mordain replied, his voice barely audible over the din. The humans used weapons that shouldn't exist. They turned gravity itself against us. Then we used the final protocol, declared Empress Vex Hynethes, her 6 eyes burning with ancient fury, at over 1,000 years old. She was the oldest serving member of the council, a veteran of the wars that had established hegemony dominance. We deployed the World Killers. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. World Killers were the hegemony's ultimate weapon, massive automated platforms, designed to crack planets and sterilize entire systems. They had been used only twice in 3,000 years, both times to make examples of species that had dared to resist too effectively. Your Majesty, Mordain protested, the humans have already demonstrated they can destroy our largest vessels. What makes you think? Because, the Empress interrupted, World Killers don't rely on conventional physics. They use quantum cascade reactions to destabilize matter at the subatomic level. Even if the humans can manipulate gravity, they cannot stop the universe itself from forgetting how to hold atoms together. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, humanity was not celebrating their victory. Admiral Kane's body had been recovered from the wreckage of the Indomitable, along with the remains of 12,000 other sailors who had died in the battle. The cost of victory was weighing heavily on everyone's mind. Secretary General Okonkwo stood in the rebuilt war room, studying reconnaissance reports from the hegemony border worlds. What she saw made her blood run cold. Ma'am, reported General Tanaka, our deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive energy signatures moving toward our system. Analysis suggests they're artificial constructs, each one roughly the size of a small moon. World Killers, Dr. Vasquez confirmed, looking up from her analysis of captured hegemony data, planet-cracking weapons. They're bringing 5 of them. How long until they arrive? 6 days. Okonkwo closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on her shoulders. Options? We could evacuate, suggested the Deputy Secretary General. Scatter the population to the outer colonies. Try to preserve the species. No. General Tanaka's voice was firm. I've read the intelligence reports. These things don't just destroy planets, they sterilize entire systems. There's nowhere to run. Admiral Kane's replacement, Admiral Marcus Sterling. Step forward. Ma'am, we still have the Ragnarok devices. We could try. The gravitational manipulators won't work, Dr. Vasquez interrupted. World killers are designed to function in quantum flux states. They exist partially outside normal space-time. Our weapons would pass right through them. Then, we build something new, Okonkwo said quietly. Dr. Vasquez, what do we know about quantum cascade reactions? They're incredibly unstable. The hegemony has spent millennia learning to control them safely. Even then, the failure rate is significant. Roughly 1 in 50 world killers destroys itself during deployment. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. What if we don't try to control them? Everyone turned to see Dr. James Morrison, a theoretical physicist who had been studying the predecessor artifacts. His eyes had the manic gleam of a man who had stared long into the abyss and found it staring back. Explain, Okonkwo ordered. The predecessors didn't just manipulate gravity, Morrison continued, moving to the main display. They understood the fundamental interconnectedness of all quantum fields. What if we could create a resonance cascade, turn the world killer's own weapons against them? That's insane, Vasquez protested. The energy release would be sufficient to sterilize everything within 50 light years, Morrison finished, including Earth, including us, but also including every hegemony world in this sector. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Morrison was proposing mutual annihilation on a galactic scale. How long would it take to build? Okonkwo asked. We already have the components. The predecessor artifacts can be reconfigured, but we need to position them correctly. And someone would need to manually trigger the cascade from inside the quantum field matrix. A suicide mission, Admiral Sterling observed, a species murder mission. Morrison corrected, we're not just talking about killing ourselves. We're talking about taking a significant chunk of the galaxy with us. Okonkwo stared at the tactical display, watching the red markers that represented humanity's approaching doom. 5 world killers, each one capable of erasing Earth from existence. Do it, she said finally. If we're going to die, we're going to make sure they remember why you never threatened humanity's children. Dr. James Morrison floated in the cramped cockpit of the UEDS Prometheus, a hastily modified deep space research vessel that now carried humanity's last desperate gambit. Around him, the quantum field generators hung with barely contained power, predecessor artifacts interfacing with human technology in ways that should have been impossible. Prometheus Control, this is Dr. Morrison. He spoke into his headset. I'm in position at the center of the grid. World killers are approximately 4 hours out. The response came from Secretary General Okonkwo herself, speaking from the war room deep beneath Geneva. Dr. Morrison, are you absolutely certain about the theoretical framework? Morrison laughed, though there was no humor in it. Ma'am, I'm about to attempt something that violates half the known laws of physics, using technology we barely understand, in order to trigger a chain reaction that will either save humanity or sterilize a quarter of the galaxy. Certainty isn't really part of the equation. Understood. Godspeed, Doctor. The quantum field generators reached full power, and Morrison felt reality begin to twist around him. The predecessor artifacts were responding to the modified human systems, creating a resonance pattern that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. According to his calculations, when the world killers arrived and began their planet-cracking sequence, the quantum cascade reactions would interfere with the artificial field matrix he was creating. The result would either be the salvation of Earth or the annihilation of everything within 50 light years, including the 13 inhabited hegemony worlds in this sector. Light years away, Empress Vex Hynethes watched the approach of her world killers. From the bridge of her personal dreadnought, Eternal Dominion, she had come personally to witness the destruction of the species that had dared to challenge hegemony supremacy. Your Majesty, reported her tactical coordinator, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the Sol system. The humans appeared to be attempting some kind of defensive measures. Irrelevant, the Empress replied with cold satisfaction. Nothing can stop world killers once they begin their sequence. In less than 4 hours, the human homeworld will be reduced to its constituent atoms. What she didn't know was that deep in the research archives of Nexus Prime, xenoarchaeologists were frantically reviewing ancient predecessor records. They had finally found references to the quantum field manipulations the humans were attempting and the warnings that came with them. High Counselor Mordain called Chief Archivist Kex Vorthek, his voice tight with panic. "You need to see this immediately." Mordain rushed to the archive chamber, where holographic displays showed predecessor text scrolling in ancient alien scripts. "What am I looking at?" he demanded. "A warning," Vorthek replied. "The predecessors apparently experimented with the same technology the humans are using. They call it the chain of innings, a quantum resonance cascade that could propagate across dimensional barriers, and, according to their records, a single test destroyed their entire homeworld cluster, 17 inhabited systems. Gone in an expanding wave of quantum dissolution, the survivors fled to the far reaches of the galaxy. But the cascade effect continued to spread for decades. Mordain felt his blood turn to ice. "Contact the Empress immediately. Tell her to abort the World Killer deployment." But the Empress was already committed to her course. When Mordain's desperate message reached her, she dismissed it with contempt. "Predecessor mythology," she snarled. "The humans are about to learn that defying the hegemony carries consequences beyond their primitive comprehension." In the Sol system, the 5 world killers took up positions around Earth like mechanical vultures. Each one was a nightmare of dark metal and quantum flux generators, designed to unmake matter at the most basic level. As they prepared to fire their targeting systems locked onto the human homeworld, Dr. Morrison watched from his position in the quantum field matrix. As the massive weapons began to charge, the energy readings were off the charts, enough power to reduce Earth to its component atoms in seconds. But he could also feel the resonance building in the predecessor artifacts around him. "All stations, this is Morrison," he broadcast on all frequencies. "World killers are beginning their firing sequence. I'm detecting quantum cascade buildup in the field matrix. This is going to work, people. This is actually going to work." His voice carried across human space to the colonies on Mars and Europa, to the mining stations in the asteroid belt, to the deep space research facilities studying alien technology. Millions of humans held their breath as their species' survival hung in the balance. The world killers fired. 5 beams of pure quantum dissolution struck Earth simultaneously, beginning the process that should have reduced humanity's homeworld to cosmic dust. But instead of simply destroying the planet, the quantum cascade reactions began to interfere. With Morrison's artificial field matrix, reality screamed. The interference pattern created by the intersection of world killer technology and predecessor quantum manipulation propagated outward faster than light, carried by dimensional resonances that existed outside normal space-time. The wavefront expanded in all directions, carrying with it the power to unmake matter at the subatomic level. The first world killer vanished as the cascade wave passed through it, its atoms forgetting how to maintain coherence. The second followed. Milliseconds later, the third, fourth, and fifth world killers simply ceased to exist as the expanding wave of quantum dissolution consumed them. But the cascade didn't stop there. Empress Vex Hynethys had just enough time to realize what was happening before her dreadnought was caught in the expanding wave. The last thing she saw was her bridge crew dissolving into component atoms. As reality itself forgot how to hold them together, the wave continued outward, reaching the 13 hegemony worlds in the local sector. Planets that had existed for billions of years simply vanished, their mass converted to energy in a flash of light visible across the galaxy. Dr. Morrison, at the center of the quantum field matrix, watched the cascade propagate outward and smiled. He had just enough time to whisper for humanity before the wave reached him and the Prometheus, ending their existence in a burst of pure energy. But he had succeeded. Earth stood intact, protected by the quantum field generators he had activated at the critical moment. The planet that had birthed humanity remained, while their enemies had been erased from existence. In the aftermath, as the quantum cascade finally dissipated after consuming 13 star systems, the galaxy fell silent. The silence lasted exactly 72 hours. Then, across the breadth of hegemony space, every species that had ever bowed to alien dominance looked up at the stars and whispered the same word: how? On Nexus Prime, High Counselor Thyras Mordain stood in the ruins of the Imperial Council chamber, staring at the tactical displays that showed 13 star systems, reduced to expanding clouds of energetic gas. The Empress was dead. Admiral Valandrix was dead. 4.7 million hegemony personnel had died in the purification fleet, and now 13 entire worlds, billions of beings had been erased from existence, all because they had laughed at a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Sir, whispered his aide, Cortex Mindril, we're receiving surrender requests from 47 member species. They're asking for immediate cessation of hostilities with the humans. Mordain turned slowly, his scaled hide ashen. Surrender requests. They want to surrender to us? No, sir. They want to surrender to the humans. They're afraid that if the war continues, the humans might do it again. The implications hit Mordain like a physical blow. The hegemony's power had always rested on the absolute certainty that resistance was futile. Every species in their empire served because they knew that defiance meant extinction. But now, for the first time in 3,000 years, a species had not merely resisted, they had proven that the hegemony itself was vulnerable. Give me a quantum burst transmission to Earth, Mordain ordered. Priority Alpha. I need to speak with their leadership immediately on Earth. Secretary General Naya Okonkwo stood in the memorial garden that had been erected, where Dr. Morrison's laboratory once stood. A simple stone monument bore the names of all those who had died in humanity's first interstellar war, the crews of the 17 ships that had engaged the Worldbreaker, the 4.7 million hegemony personnel who had died in the Purification Fleet, and Dr. James Morrison, who had given his life to save not just humanity, but potentially the galaxy itself. Ma'am, called Admiral Sterling, approaching with a secure communication device. We're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime. It's High Counselor Mordain, acting ruler of the hegemony. He's requesting immediate peace negotiations. Okonkwo accepted the device with steady hands. The holographic image that materialized showed an alien being that looked far older and more fragile than the proud warriors humanity had faced in battle. Secretary General Okonkwo, Mordain began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute exhaustion. I am High Counselor Thyras Mordain, acting leader of what remains of the hegemony of Ascended Worlds. I am contacting you to discuss terms, Okonkwo asked, her voice carefully neutral. Terms of surrender, Mordain clarified. We yield. We acknowledge human sovereignty over your territory and formally request cessation of hostilities. For a moment, Okonkwo was speechless. The most powerful empire in the galaxy was surrendering to a species they had dismissed as primitives barely a week ago. High Counselor, she said finally, I need to be very clear about something. We did not attack your territories. We did not invade your worlds. You came to our system with the declared intention of exterminating our species. What happened to your worlds was a consequence of your own actions. I understand, Mordain replied. We underestimated you. We thought you were just another primitive species that could be easily conquered or destroyed. We were wrong. Yes, Okonkwo said quietly, you were. What followed were the most unusual peace negotiations in galactic history. The hegemony, despite having lost only a fraction of their total military power, was suing for peace from a position of absolute terror. The quantum cascade had demonstrated that humanity possessed weapons that could literally erase star systems from existence. The final treaty, signed 6 months later, became known as the Soul Accords. Its terms were deceptively simple. First, the hegemony would formally recognize human sovereignty over all territory within 50 light years of Earth. Second, any hegemony vessel entering human space without explicit permission would be considered an act of war. Third, the hegemony would provide full technological and historical databases to humanity, including all information about other species and galactic civilization. Fourth, humanity would share certain non-military technologies with hegemony worlds, specifically medical and agricultural advances that can improve quality of life. But the most important clause was the fifth. Humanity would establish diplomatic relations with all species currently under hegemony rule, offering them the same choice that had been denied to Earth, the right to choose their own destiny. Within 5 years, over 100 species had declared independence from the hegemony. The galactic empire that had ruled for 3 millennia collapsed not through military conquest, but through the simple realization that resistance was possible. Humanity became the de facto protector of free space, not through conquest, but through example. The quantum cascade technology was never used again. The human government declared it too dangerous to exist and destroyed all research related to it. But the threat remained, unspoken but understood throughout the galaxy. 10 years after the war, Okonkwo stood once again in the Memorial Garden, now expanded to include monuments to the billions of beings who had died in the Cascade. The garden had become a pilgrimage site for species throughout the galaxy, a reminder of the price of tyranny and the cost of freedom. Secretary General called a familiar voice. She turned to see High Counselor Mordain, now serving as ambassador. From the reformed Hegemony Confederation, age had been his once proud form, but his eyes held something that had been absent during the war. Hope, High Counselor. She replied with genuine warmth. How are the negotiations proceeding? Better than expected. The Zephyrian Republic has agreed to join the Galactic Council of Free Worlds. That makes 87 independent systems now. He paused, looking at the monument to Dr. Morrison. Do you ever wonder what he would think of what we've built? Okonkwo considered the question carefully. I think he would be proud that his sacrifice led to freedom for billions of beings. But I also think he would remind us that the price of that freedom is eternal vigilance. The humans have a saying, Mordain observed. Those who would trade liberty for security deserve neither. We in the old hegemony never understood that principle. We thought security could only come through domination, and now we know that true security comes from justice, from knowing that every species has the right to choose its own path among the stars. He gestured toward the monument. Your Dr. Morrison didn't just save humanity, Secretary General. He saved the galaxy from the tyranny of absolute power, as if summoned by their words. A group of young beings approached the monument. Humans, former hegemony species, and others from across the galaxy. They came to pay their respects to the man who had changed everything, who had proven that sometimes the only way to save civilization is to risk everything. They called themselves the Morrison Cadets, young officers and scientists dedicated to exploring the galaxy not as conquerors, but as guardians of freedom. Each wore a small badge bearing the same inscription that adorned Dr. Morrison's monument. For humanity, for freedom, for the right to exist among the stars. As Okonkwo watched them place flowers at the memorial, she reflected on the strange path that had led humanity from an insignificant world to the moral center of galactic civilization. The hegemony had come to Earth expecting to find primitives. Instead, they had found something far more dangerous, a species that would rather die free than live in chains. The Empire had laughed at Earth. They had dismissed humanity as inconsequential, another primitive species to be cataloged and controlled. They had learned, too late, that humans don't respond to laughter with submission. They respond with the kind of absolute, uncompromising defiance that turns capital worlds into expanding clouds of gas and transforms the political landscape of an entire galaxy. The Memorial Garden stood as eternal testimony to a simple truth that now echoed across the stars. Never threaten humanity's children. Never underestimate a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history learning to weaponize the impossible, and never, ever make the mistake of laughing at Earth, because humans have a long memory and they always remember who laughed first.